Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I'm trying an experiment. Yesterday I read you an essay by somebody else, and readers said they liked it. So I'm going to do another one. This one is by the famous author of 1984, George Orwell, and Animal Farm as well. And he also wrote a lot of essays. And one of them was called Such Were the Joys of His School Experience. Now, think about the fact that this was what George Orwell felt about school. This is, by the way, our excerpt. It's a very long essay, so this is probably a 10-minute version of what would otherwise be an hour long, which is too much to ask any human being to sit in front of a YouTube video and watch. So, okay. His school was called St. Cyprian's. Soon after I arrived at St. Cyprian's School, I began wetting my bed. I was now aged 8. So this was a reversion to a habit I must have grown out of at least 4 years earlier. For my part, I didn't need to be told it was a crime. Night after night I prayed with a fervor never previously obtained in my prayers. Please, God, do not let me wet my bed. Oh, please, God, do not let me wet my bed. But it made remarkably little difference. The grim, statuesque matron, Margaret by name, arrived in the dormitory, specially to inspect my bed. She pulled back the clothes, then drew herself up, and the dreaded words seemed to come rolling out of her like a peal of thunder. Report yourself to the headmaster after breakfast. I do not know how many times I heard that phrase during my early years at St. Cyprian's. It was only very rarely that it did not mean a beating. The words always had a portentous sound in my ears, like muffled drums or the words of a death sentence. It was part of the punishment of reporting yourself, that you had to proclaim your offense with your own lips. When I had had my say, the headmaster read me a long but pompous lecture, then seized me by the scruff of the neck, twisted me over, and began beating me with the riding crop. He had a habit of continuing his lecture while he flogged you, and I remember the words, "You dirty little boy," keeping time with the blows. The beating did not hurt. Maybe it was because it was the first time he wasn't hitting me very hard. And I walked out feeling very much better. The fact that the beating had not hurt was sort of a victory, and partially wiped out the shame of the bedwetting. I was even incautious enough to wear a grin on my face. Some small boys were hanging about in the passage outside the door of the anteroom. "Did you get the cane?" "It didn't hurt," I said proudly. But the headmaster had heard everything. Instantly, his voice came screaming after me. "Come here! Come here this instant!" "What was that you said?" "I said it didn't hurt." "How dare you say such a thing like that? Do you think that's a proper thing to say? Go in and report yourself again." This time, the headmaster laid on in real earnest. He continued for a length of time that frightened and astonished me, about 5 minutes it seemed, ending up by breaking the riding crop. The bone handle went flying across the room. "Look what you made me do!" I had fallen into a chair, sniveling. I remember that this was the only time throughout my boyhood when a beating actually reduced me to tears. And curiously enough, I was not even crying because of the pain. The second beating had not hurt very much either. Fright and shame seemed to have anesthetized me. I was crying partly because I felt that was expected, which is peculiar to childhood and not easy to convey. A sense of desolate loneliness and helplessness, of being locked up not only in a hostile world, but a hostile world of good and evil, where the rules were such that it was actually not possible for me to keep them. That was the great abiding lesson of my boyhood, that I was in a world where it was not possible for me to be good. I have good memories of school, among a horde of bad ones. Sometimes on summer afternoons there were wonderful expeditions across the downs to a village called Burling Gap, or to Beachy Head, where one bathed dangerously among the boulders and came home covered with cuts. And there were still more wonderful midsummer evenings when, as a special treat, we were not driven off to bed as usual, but allowed to wander about the grounds in the long twilight, ending up with a plunge into the swimming bath about 9 o'clock. There was the joy of waking early on summer mornings and getting in an hour of undisturbed reading. Thackeray, Kipling, and H.G. Wells were the favorite authors of my boyhood. In the sunlit, sleeping dormitory. There was also cricket, which I was no good at, but which I conducted a sort of hopeless love affair with up until about age 18. And there was the pleasure of keeping caterpillars, the silky green and purple puss moth, the ghostly green poplar hawk, the privet hawk, large as 1/3 of one finger, specimens which could be illicitly purchased for 6 pence at a shop in the town. And when one could escape long enough from the master who was taking a walk, there was the excitement of dredging the dew ponds on the downs for the enormous newts with orange-colored bellies. This business of being out for a walk, coming across something of fascinating interest, and then being dragged away from it by a yell from the master, like a dog jerked onward by the leash, is an important feature of school life, and helps to build up the conviction so strong in many children that the things you most want to do are always unattainable. I was an unattractive boy. School made me so, even if I had not been so before. But a child's belief in his own shortcomings is not so much influenced by facts. I believed, for example, that I smelled. But this was based simply on general probability. It was notorious that disagreeable people smelled, and therefore presumably I did so too. Again, until after I left school for good, I continued to believe I was preternaturally ugly. It was what my schoolfellows had told me, and I had no other authority to refer to. The conviction that it was not possible for me to be a success went deep enough to influence my actions till far into adult life. Until I was about 30, I always planned my life on the assumption that not only that any major undertaking was bound to fail, but that I could expect to live only a few years longer. But this sense of guilt and inevitable failure was balanced by something else. That is, the instinct to survive. Even a creature that's weak, ugly, cowardly, smelly, and in no way justifiable, still wants to stay alive and be happy after its own fashion. I could not invert the existing scale of values, or turn myself into a success, but I could accept my failure and make the best of it. I could resign myself to being what I was, and then endeavor to survive on those terms. To survive, or at least to preserve any kind of independence, was essentially criminal, since it meant breaking rules which you yourself recognized. There was a boy named Johnny Hale, who for some months oppressed me horribly. He was a big, powerful, coarsely handsome boy with a very red face and curly black hair, who was forever twisting someone's arm, wringing someone's ear, flogging someone with a riding crop, or performing prodigies of activity on the football field. The headmaster loved him, commending him as a boy who had character and who could keep order. He was followed about by a group of toadies who named him Strongman. One day, when we were taking off our overcoats in the changing room, Hale picked on me for some reason, and I answered him back, whereupon he gripped my wrist, twisted it round, and bent my forearm back upon itself in a hideous, painful way. I remember his handsome, jeering red face bearing down on mine. He was, I think, older than I, besides being enormously stronger. As he let go of me, a terrible, wicked resolve formed in my heart. I would get back at him by hitting him when he didn't expect it. It was a strategic moment, for the master, who had been taking a walk, would be coming back soon, and then there could be no fight. I let perhaps a minute go by, walked up to Hale with the most harmless air I could assume, and then, getting the weight of my body behind it, smashed my fist into his face. He was flung backward by the blow, and some blood ran out of his mouth. His always sanguine face turned almost black with rage. Then he turned away to rinse his mouth at the wash basin. "All right," he said to me between his teeth as the master led us away. The fact I hardly noticed was that in subsequent days, though Hale formally challenged me to fight, he did not actually attack me. Indeed, after receiving... Excuse me a minute, I'm so sorry. this moment. Sorry. The fact that I hardly noticed was that in subsequent days, though Hale formally, I'm having a problem with the computer, formally challenged me to fight, he did not actually attack me. Indeed, after receiving that one blow, he never oppressed me again. It was perhaps 20 years before I saw the significance of this. At the time, I could not see beyond the moral dilemma that is presented to the weak in a world governed by the strong. Break the rules or perish. I did not see that in that case the weak have the right to make a different set of rules for themselves, because even if such an idea occurred to me, there was no one in my environment who could confirm me in it. I lived in a world of gregarious animals, questioning nothing, accepting the law of the stronger and avenging their own humiliations by passing them down to someone smaller. There was a time for a bit of happiness before the future closed in on me. But I did know that the future was dark. Failure, 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 failure behind me, failure ahead of me. That was by far the deepest conviction that I carried away. And those were excerpts from the long essay called Such Were the Joys by, ironically, the world-famous, iconic writer, author of 1984 and Animal Farm, George Orwell. I'm Marty Nemko. I thank you for watching. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel, which mainly consists of how-to advice, but I've been trying to intersperse with different things, like I've been playing the piano, and now I'm going to be reading essays every so often, of which this was one. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I am Marty Nemko.